As the Lord passed by, the wind began to blow. It tore at the mountains, and the rocks broke into pieces before the Lord, but he was not in the wind. And after the wind, the earth began to shake. The ground began to rumble, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a whisper, and that whisper was God.
Well, hey, students, welcome to our YouTube channel. Thanks for jumping on and hanging out with us this week. I'm excited about this week for a couple reasons. One, we are getting very close to Easter week, which is always one of my favorite holidays. As a Christian, there really is no bigger day in celebration of who Jesus is and what he did on the cross for us. And the other one is that we're wrapping up this series tonight. We've been in this series called Listen to Him for the last 7 weeks. But I got to be honest, it's been one of my very favorite series we've ever done. I know it's been a long one, but the devotional readings, the studies that we have done together have been really, really good for me. I hope they've been good for you as well. This series has kind of carried us through the season of Lent, and we've talked about a lot that Lent is kind of this 40-day preparation for Easter. We basically, for the Christians for centuries, have taken 40 days leading up to Easter and have either removed things from their lives or added them into simply to focus on their relationship with Jesus. And that's really the goal. Next week, we're going to celebrate all sorts of things from Palm Sunday to Good Friday to Maundy Thursday. And then eventually on Sunday, we'll celebrate Easter. It is a big week in the life of the church. And so my hope is that you are joining us, whether it's in person or online, for our Easter services this coming, actually about 10 days from now, because we're excited to be able to celebrate with you. I want to start tonight by asking this question. The title of this message is called, What Can I Give? And that's really what Easter kind of leads us to, right? Like Easter leads us to that question. Jesus gave everything. So our only logical response is to give something, to look at ways in which we can serve others. I remember years ago, we had a horrible snowstorm in Kansas City, and we had gone to church that morning. There weren't very many people that had come, but I remember I had just bought a truck, and I love to find opportunities to show off that I had a truck. Yes, I was one of those people. And I remember we had to run to Walmart after church, and so we pulled in, and there were these 2 girls, probably college age, that were in this little car, and they were stuck. And so I remember being excited. I had Caitlin with me, and I got out and I got the tow rope out and I pulled them out, and they started to move along. And I remember that as I got them out, they said, "Hey, thank you so much." And she tried to give me money, and I was like, "No, it literally took me 3 minutes." And I was like, no, it's totally fine, no worries, you don't have to get. And she almost insisted. And then I just had to finally say, just don't worry about it, just have a great day. Hope you. And she was headed to work, whatever. Have a great day. And it's interesting as I think back on that, it was such a small thing in the moment, but her expectation was that with me helping her, that there was going to be some sort of payment that I was going to require for helping her. And that really wasn't how I function. And what's so interesting about that is that it is so countercultural to our world today. You see, when we give to something to somebody, they expect to pay us in some way. And what's so interesting about that is that's not how Jesus worked. Jesus came and gave all so that all had the opportunity to have life and have salvation through him. But there was no expectation that we would somehow pay. In fact, Jesus was pretty aware that there was nothing we were ever going to be able to do to repay him for this gift. And yet our world is so saturated in this idea that if we give something, we're expecting something in return. And I think it's time, honestly, as the church, as followers of Jesus, that we just begin to give in a way that doesn't expect anything in return, simply because of what Jesus has done through us. I think if we were to ask this question, if we were to sit and ponder, and if I was to come to you and I was to say, hey, I've figured it out. I figured out a formula that we can actually slow the earth down, and this is actually going to give you 3 more hours in your day. So instead of a 24-hour day, you're now going to have a 27-hour day. How would you fill the other 3 hours? See, my guess is you would say things like, well, I would sleep a little bit more. I might eat a 4th meal, like Taco Bell would finally be right all these years. I would maybe study more. I would practice more. I would do more of my hobby. I would spend more time with friends. I would, maybe go to the movies more often, or whatever you do, you would find ways to fill that 3 hours. And my guess is that the first thing we would run to would not be, well, I would find ways to serve others, or I would find ways to give back to others, or I would find ways to make other people's lives a little bit better. And I think the danger in that is that we just excuse away our giving because of busyness. We just simply sit and say, well, I would serve if I wasn't so busy. And I don't think we have a busyness problem. I think we have a problem with remembering the call that Jesus gave us, and more importantly, the Jesus, his image, we bear the image of Jesus into our world, and that needs to change how we look at the things that we have been given. We're going to look at a scripture today in Luke chapter 20, and it's towards the end of the book of Luke, and Jesus is coming towards the end of his life, and he continues to have these moments with the religious leaders where he has made them upset, and they're trying to find ways in which they can accuse him, trying to find ways in which they can bring charges to either put him in jail or to execute him because they don't like the message that he is sharing. And that's what we find again in Luke chapter 20. In verse 20 says this: watching for their opportunity, talking about the religious leaders, the leaders sent spies pretending to be honest men. They tried to get Jesus to say something that could be reported to the Roman governor so he would arrest Jesus. Teacher, they said, we know that you speak and teach what is right and are not influenced by what others think. Notice how they're flattering Jesus to begin with, right? Like they're trying to say, Jesus, we know that you're incredible. We know that you're God. We know all these things, because they're trying to trick him. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now tell us, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And see, we don't know all the details of this conversation, but my guess would be, and maybe if it was put into context in 2021 instead of the first century, we would say something more like, well, Jesus, think about if we didn't have to pay taxes. If we didn't have to pay taxes and we could just follow you because, God, you're the most important thing in our life. We want to serve you, and everything that you have given us, we want to give back. Like, if we didn't have to pay taxes, just think about for a minute. If we didn't have to pay taxes, think about all the meals we could serve to people who need it. Think of all the homes we could build for people who need a house. Think of all the clothing we could provide for people who don't have clothing. Think of all the things we could do, Jesus, if we just didn't have to pay taxes. And maybe in your context, the best way to ask this would be, Jesus, if I didn't have to go to school, just think of all the things I could do. And they're trying to kind of pitch this idea to Jesus of like, Jesus, if you will just tell us not to pay taxes, we'll stop and think of all the things we could do. The Roman government was incredibly oppressive to the Jewish people. It was corrupt. It beat up on the Jewish people. And so they really didn't want to pay taxes. And they were asking Jesus for permission to say no, for Jesus to basically step in and say, you don't have to pay taxes. But the problem is, where the question gets a little bit difficult and probably unanswerable for Jesus, is that if Jesus is to say, no, you don't have to pay taxes, like I'm the most important thing, just put your faith in me, ignore what the government tells you, then he's committing treason. And the Roman government will execute him for treason. You know, during COVID, I heard a lot of churches use this verse to basically say, we're going to keep meeting. We're going to ignore the government. And I think what's interesting about that is Jesus doesn't say to ignore the government. In fact, Jesus says something a little bit different. He says this in verse 23. He saw through their trickery and said, show me a Roman coin. So they hand him a Roman coin. Whose picture is stamped on it? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. So he takes the coin, he looks at it, and he gets a Roman coin, and on the face of the coin, in the same way that our former presidents are stamped on our money, Caesar's face was stamped upon this coin from Rome. And what he's saying is remember who owns what. Remember who needs what. So he's saying when taxes come up, you have to pay taxes. You are under the authority of the government. But remember that you're mine, that your worship, that your devotion belongs to God. Listen to the rules and the laws of what the government tells you and follow them because they have authority over you. But remember whose you are and who you worship. Maybe to say it a little bit differently, Caesar's image is on money. God's image is on you. And when God's image is on us, it requires a response. And God's image is on you because in Genesis chapter 1, at the creation of mankind, in verse 27, it says that so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. He created you, male and female. He created them. So when God's image is on us, we have a responsibility to portray the image that Jesus calls upon us to. And yet so often, the call of Jesus gets shoved down behind all of the busyness. And so what I want to do in just the last couple minutes of our conversation is I want to maybe wrestle with some ways in which we can give. Some things in which maybe we can rethink how we give and how we use the things that God has given us. The first one is to use your platform. You probably never thought of the idea that you have a platform. You have a sphere of influence. You have a group of people who you have influence into their life. Maybe it's a team, maybe it's a club, maybe it's your social media, maybe it's a certain class that you're in, but you have influence in the places that you are in. And some of you have greater influence, some of you have lesser influence, but everybody has a sphere of influence. So how are you using that? How are you using your image, your influence inside of whatever sphere you live in to make an impact? And here's the deal. I'm not talking about in this message standing up and challenging people with the gospel. I'm talking about how are you serving those? How are you reflecting the image of Jesus in the circles that you are in? I mean, maybe it's better to ask it this way. Would the people that you're closest with, would they know you're a Christian other than what you post on Instagram? Would they know you're a Christian more than the Bible verse that you highlight in the Bible app? Would they know you're a Christian because of the way in which you serve others? Or is it just all talk and no action? How are you using the platform that you have been given? Like, do you ever stop and just think, like, to the depth of how much you have been given from God? Like, even the idea that we have the ability to communicate with each other is a gift from God. How are you using it? The second thing is to serve through your passions. In a couple weeks, we're going to kick off a new series called Do Something, and we're going to highlight different mission partners in Kansas City. And my guess is that, or what I know about teenagers typically, is we have things that are more passionate for us than others. So you may be super passionate about homelessness. You may be super passionate about youth education. You may be super passionate about hunger. You may be super passionate about racism. You may be super passionate about a lot of different things. How can you serve through those passions? The Bible calls it the holy discontent. What do you see in our world that breaks your heart and you stand up and say, no, I refuse to accept this? How do you serve through your passions? The ways in which God has wired you and the things that you are passionate about. Maybe it's your sport, or maybe it's a hobby that you have. How do you utilize those things that God has gifted you in and inspired you to be a part of to serve others? The last and final one is see the whole picture. You see, I think sometimes we get this idea of going out and serving others. It's just kind of this nebulous thing, and it seems like this massive thing because the church is losing influence in our culture today. And so we just decide that the problem is just too big, God, I can't get involved. And there's an old saying that all it takes for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. And so what we have to see is that we're all a part of God's mission within that, and we all have a role to play. Yours may be big, yours may be small, but we all have a role to play. I remember years ago, I had a student named Mackenzie. Mackenzie was a sophomore, and we were getting ready to go on a fall retreat, and I really wanted Mackenzie to go and be a part of it. And so I remember pulling her aside and said, hey, Mackenzie, why don't you come on this retreat with us? She said, I would love to go, but I have a marching band competition that week. And I was like, not being a band person, my kind of response was like, well, it's just marching band. Just blow it off. Come hang out with us on the retreat. And she said, no, you don't understand. If I'm not there, there will be a hole in my spot. And I said, well, I understand that, but just have everybody kind of shift over. And she goes, it doesn't really work that way. And it's interesting. When I think about that story and I think about that moment with Mackenzie, it's similar to how it works within God's church. You see, we all have a role to play. You see, when Mackenzie's in the marching band, she's using her platform, she's serving through her passions, and she's seeing the whole picture. She knows that she's an integral part of a much bigger picture. And the same is true with you and I. We all have a platform, we all have passions, and if we all see the bigger picture, that we are simply a piece of a much larger picture, it changes everything. So my challenge for you this week is to think about your platform. Think about your passions. And think about the picture that God is trying to paint around you. And how might you play a role in that? Let's pray. Jesus, we're grateful for this time to be able to jump on our YouTube channel and have this conversation. God, as we talk about what maybe we can give, God, I pray for all of our students that they can look at the different passions that you have given them, the platforms that they have been provided, and utilize those to make a difference. Thanks for who you are. Thanks for loving us. God, as we come into this season, thank you for Jesus, who changes everything. We love you and praise in your name. Amen. Thanks for being with us this week. Hope you guys have an awesome Easter. We will not be on here next week, taking the week off because you guys in Lee Summit are on spring break. So have a safe and awesome spring break, and we'll see you guys in April. Have a great day.